The summons paper crinkled in my hand as the deputy handed it over on Veterans Day week no less, while the cold wind rattled the flags overhead. Name's Walter Briggs, retired mechanic 69. The smell of burnt diner coffee still clung to my jacket as I stared at that slip like it might bite. Kept my father's old service pin fastened to my collar, though right then it felt more like a target. Ever had a good deed. Land you in court. Walter Briggs's battered old truck rolled down Ashwood's main street, its faded paint glinting in the morning sun as townsfolk paused their coffee to look up. The vehicle gave a soft wheeze as it came to a stop near the Maple Leaf Diner, its driver easing the creaky door open with the care of someone who didn't want to disturb the peace more than necessary. A few heads turned inside the diner, their owners nursing mugs of steaming coffee hands curled around the warmth. Veterans Day. Banners flapped gently in the cool breeze. Red, white, and blue rippling in unison above the quiet hum of a town waking to another November morning. The door to the diner jingled softly as Walter entered, nodding politely to Hank Dorsey behind the counter. Hank, wiping down a section of the polished counter, returned the nod with a small smile. "Cold one this morning, huh?" Hank offered, his voice low and easy. Walter's lips tugged upward just slightly. "Sure is," Walter said, sliding a few bills onto the counter as he accepted the cup of black coffee Hank poured for him. The rich aroma mingled with the faint sweetness of pies cooling on the sill. Without asking, Hank nudged over a small plate holding a biscuit his way of offering a quiet welcome. Walter didn't refuse, nor did he linger. He left a tip that was generous for the price, folding it beneath his empty cup before stepping back out into the morning air. The wind carried the rustling whisper of fallen leaves along the sidewalk as Walter made his way toward the town square. His boots crunched over patches of frost still clinging stubbornly in the shadows. The square bore the signs of the last storm branches littered the path, a bench had toppled onto its side, and scraps of paper clung to the wrought iron fence that bordered the small park. Without fanfare, Walter set about picking up what he could, righting the bench, gathering debris into a neat pile. His movements were steady, deliberate, and unnoticed at first. But as the minutes passed, the quiet rhythm of the square shifted. Curtains twitched in nearby windows. A man locking up his shop paused, keys in hand, watching with a puzzled expression. Across the street, a woman walking her dog slowed, squinting to make out the figure by the fence. Whispers began to float soft as the wind that stirred the flags above. Who was this man cleaning without being asked? Was he supposed to be there? Walter worked on unaware or perhaps unconcerned with the growing attention. His old army jacket, worn at the cuffs and faded at the shoulders, caught the light as he bent to gather a broken branch. The sound of tires on gravel drew closer, a deputy's cruiser pulling up to the curb. The engine idled as the deputy stepped out, his boots clicking against the pavement, hand resting casually on his belt. "Mornin', sir." The deputy began, his tone polite but edged with the formality of someone responding to a report. "Mind telling me what you're doing here?" Walter straightened, dusting his hands on his jeans. His voice was mild, steady. "Just tidying up a bit. Looked like it could use it." The deputy shifted, glancing around the square, then back at Walter. "Appreciate the sentiment, but this here's city property. Folks get nervous when they see someone they don't know poking around. Got a permit for what you're doing?" Walter shook his head, the faintest crease appearing between his brows. Didn't think one was needed to pick up trash. A small crowd had begun to gather at the edges of the square. People lingered under the guise of morning errands, eyes on the interaction, voices low as they speculated. Was he new in town? Trouble just another drifter passing through? The breeze carried their words, snatches of guesswork and assumption that stung more than they intended. The deputy sighed, pulling a small notepad from his pocket. "I'm going to have to issue a citation, sir. unauthorized activity on city grounds. Walter's gaze dropped for a beat to the ground between them, then rose again, calm and unwavering. If that's what you need to do. The paper rustled as the deputy tore off the summons, handing it over. Walter took at the edge, fluttering in the breeze like the banners overhead. He glanced at the paper, sighed, and muttered softly, just trying to do some good, as onlookers exchanged doubtful looks. The bell above the courthouse door chimed softly as Walter stepped inside, boots clicking on the worn wooden floor. The air smelled faintly of aged paper and polish, the kind of scent that clung to places where time seemed to move slower. Through the tall windows, the town square offered glimpses of red, white, and blue as flags and banners continued to go up in anticipation of Veterans Day. Outside, the sound of children's laughter floated on the cold breeze as they practiced for the parade, their voices bright against the hush inside the building. Earlier that morning, Walter had walked along Main Street feeling the weight of eyes upon him. Some townsfolk nodded politely, their greetings clipped and cautious. Others simply watched, their curiosity thinly veiled behind small talk exchanged with neighbors. Shopkeepers stepped out to adjust flags or sweep their stoops, pausing just long enough to glance his way before returning to their tasks. The snap of bunting in the breeze and the clatter of tools as workers secured decorations filled the spaces between those looks, a rhythm that seemed to underscore his solitude. He'd stopped at the Maple Leaf Diner on his way. The familiar creak of the door, the warmth of the place, and the rich aroma of fresh coffee offered a fleeting comfort. Hank Dorsey caught his eye as he stepped inside. Without a word, Hank poured a cup, slid it across the counter, and followed it with a plate holding a thick slice of pie. Walter reached into his pocket, but Hank shook his head once firm but kind. Walter gave a small nod of thanks, savoring the simple gesture more than the food itself. The diner hummed softly with conversation talk of the weather, of the parade of family coming in for the weekend. From a corner booth, Elaine Turner watched him, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug. Recognition flickered in her gaze, a memory she couldn't quite grasp fully. Her lips parted as if to speak, but the words stayed lodged in her throat. Now, standing in the courthouse, Walter took a slow breath. The brass fixtures on the walls were tarnished but dignified, their dull gleam catching the pale morning light. The pews creaked as a clerk moved past, sorting files with practiced efficiency. Walter settled onto one of the benches to wait his turn, the hush of the place pressing in around him. He glanced through the window at the square, watching a shopkeeper string the last of the banners across a storefront. The sight should have been reassuring, a reminder of shared traditions, but it only deepened the sense of distance he felt. His intentions, so simple in his mind, had become something tangled in the town's wary assumptions. Minutes stretched, marked only by the shuffling of papers and the soft cough of another waiting party. The murmur of voices in the hallway ebbed and flowed. Walter's thoughts drifted, recalling the feel of the wind as he worked in the square, the way the leaves had swirled around his boots, the look in the deputy's eyes as he handed over that summons. Good intentions, he mused, could turn heavy so quickly in the court of public opinion. The door behind the bench opened and Margaret Caldwell stepped into view, her robes flowing as she moved with measured purpose. Stern and focused, she carried herself with the authority of someone long used to keeping order. Her gaze swept the room, settling briefly on each figure before her as she prepared to call the day's docket. Walter felt the quiet shift as everyone straightened, as if the building itself respected the weight of the proceedings about to begin. A clerk read off a few names cases, moving along with the steady rhythm of small-town justice. Then came the moment. Margaret Caldwell called Walter's case. His name echoed in the quiet courtroom as he rose. He felt every eye turn toward him, the weight of their curiosity and their judgment mingling with the faint, musty smell of old paper and the creak of the floor beneath his boots. Margaret glances at Walter's jacket brow, furrowing as a faint memory stirs. Margaret Caldwell's gavel stilled in her hand as she studied the man before her, recognition flickering behind her steely gaze. The quiet of the courtroom seemed to press closer, as if even the air was waiting for what would come next. Outside, the sunlight angled through the tall windows, casting narrow stripes across the worn wooden floor and catching dust motes that danced in the stillness.
From beyond the glass, faint sounds of the town at work drifted in the measured beat of a hammer. As a banner was secured, the soft chatter of townsfolk, preparing for the holiday, the rustle of bunting in the breeze. But within the room, no one moved. No one spoke as all eyes fixed on the judge and the man standing before her. Walter Briggs met Margaret's gaze steady and unflinching. His stance was neither defiant nor meek, simply that of a man who had long ago made peace with being misunderstood. The old army jacket he wore hung a little loose on his frame, its fabric softened by years, and whether its color faded, but still proud. He cleared his throat, the small sound loud in the hush. "I was only trying to help," Walter said quietly. His voice carried no trace of resentment, no defense sharpened by bitterness. "After the storm, I saw the mess in the square. Figured it needed clearing. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." His hands remained at his sides, fingers curling lightly against his palms, as if holding back words he didn't think would matter. Margaret's fingers tightened briefly on the gavel before she set it down, the small click of wood on wood, swallowed by the silence. Her eyes swept over Walter again, his face lined by time and sun, his bearing straight, but weary, the jacket that seemed so familiar, it made her chest ache. A memory stirred deeper now, unspooling like a reel of film long stored away. A night of rain, heavy and relentless. The roar of floodwaters where they shouldn't have been. A house on the edge of being taken by the river's fury. And a young soldier soaked to the bone, his eyes alight with purpose as he carried her brother to safety across a broken bridge. The details sharpened with every heartbeat, the grip of that soldier's hand, as he steadied himself, the calm in his voice despite the chaos around them. The very jacket he wore patched at the shoulder, worn at the elbows, the same as the one before her now. She saw not the stranger that rumors had painted, but the man who had once given her family back, a son, a brother. A murmur stirred in the gallery as the weight of Margaret's gaze shifted, as if those watching could sense the change, though they couldn't yet name it. Walter stood motionless, his quiet dignity filling the space more completely than any defense could. The sunlight caught in his hair, silvered with age, and in the fine lines that marked the corners of his eyes. Margaret drew a breath, slow and steady, her voice finding both softness and strength. "This court owes you an apology." The words fell into the silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples through the room. There was a collective intake of breath, a rustle of fabric as people shifted in their seats. Surprise breaking through the quiet judgment that had reigned only moments before. Walter blinked, surprised. Margaret leans forward slightly, eyes kindling with respect. "Let's set the record straight." The courtroom seemed to breathe again as Margaret's words settled over the crowd like the first light of dawn. For a moment, it felt as though the walls themselves had softened, as if the weight of tension that had filled the room for so long had finally begun to lift. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long patterns across the worn floorboards and warming the faces of those gathered. Outside, the air carried the crispness of early November, and with it the sound of distant hammers and voices as shopkeepers secured the final Veterans Day banners across Main Street. The red, white, and blue bunting snapped lightly in the breeze, the colors bright against the pale sky. Breath misted in the cold air whenever the door creaked open, bringing with it the scent of pine from wreaths hung on nearby shop doors. Margaret's gavel rested quietly on the bench, forgotten for the time being. She let her gaze sweep over those before her, the neighbors, friends, and townsfolk, who filled the pews, who had come expecting the ordinary business of the court, and found instead a reckoning of their own making. The apology she had offered in Walter Briggs's direction still echoed softly in the minds of those present, a reminder that their judgments had come too swiftly, too easily. This, she knew, was only the beginning. There was work to be done not just by her, but by them all. Elaine Turner shifted on the edge of her seat, her hands gripping the back of the pew in front of her. The hush of the room seemed to press around her, but she drew in a breath and rose to her feet. She was slight, her shoulders hunched slightly beneath a threadbare coat, but when she spoke, her voice, though trembling, carried through the stillness. She spoke of a night years past, when a flood had come without mercy, when the river had risen and claimed nearly everything in its path. She told of how in that hour of fear a man had appeared clad in an old army jacket soaked to the skin, but steady as a rock. That man had carried her children to safety, one under each arm, his boots finding purchase where the water tried to sweep him away. He had vanished before dawn, asking for nothing, leaving no name. But now, standing in this light, she saw him again. The same jacket, the same quiet strength. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, low at first, then spreading like the morning sun creeping over the horizon. Faces turned toward Walter, seeing him now as if for the first time. Hank Dorsey stepped forward, cap in hand, his voice warm and clear as he shared his own memory. He spoke of the town's baseball field, how one spring after a harsh winter, it had been mended overnight, the bleachers scrubbed clean, the fence repaired, the trash cleared. No one had claimed credit. No one had boasted. And now, as Hank looked at Walter, he knew the truth of it. Outside the courthouse, word spread faster than the cold wind that tugged at scarves and coat hems. Small knots of people gathered on the steps, breath puffing, in the chill voices rising and falling, in bursts as they shared what they had seen, what they had heard. The rhythm of Ashwood's morning changed, with each telling the story, growing clearer, the understanding deeper. The scent of wood smoke mingled with pine, and the faint sound of church bells drifted from across the square, as if marking the shift in the town's heart. Margaret rose again, her voice steady but kind. She spoke not of guilt, but of duty. She called upon Ashwood to do more than murmur its regret or whisper its thanks. Let there be a tribute. She urged a gesture that would last, that would stand as a reminder of the quiet service that had too long gone unnoticed. Something beyond words, beyond this day. In the back of the room, a local reporter scribbled furiously, his pencil flying across the page as he tried to keep up with the moment. His eyes shone with the knowledge that here was a story that deserved to be told beyond these walls. He looked up at last, breathless, the hum of the gathering swelling behind him. Mind if I spread this story beyond Ashwood, Mr. Briggs, at Maple Leaf Diner, the clink of coffee cups mixed with the buzz of plans being made. The warm glow of the place softened the briskness of the November morning outside, where the streets of Ashwood bore their Veterans Day finery. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the sweet, buttery aroma of pies cooling near the window, the air rich with cinnamon and nutmeg. Hank Dorsey stood near the counter, his cap pushed back on his head, a wide grin beneath his mustache as he spoke in a voice that carried easily over the hum of conversation. The diner, usually a quiet refuge for early risers and tired workers, had become the unofficial headquarters of the town's efforts. Hank had rallied them well. Neighbors who rarely did more than nod hello on the street now sat elbow to elbow in booths and around pushed-together tables, sharing ideas with a common purpose. Some sketched plans on napkins, others jotted names on scraps of paper, volunteering their skills, their time, their hearts. There was talk of banners, of a plaque, of music and speeches. The energy was contagious, and it warmed even the coldest corners of the room. Outside, Walter Briggs walked through the square, his hands in his coat pockets, his steps slow and thoughtful. The crisp air nipped at his cheeks, but he hardly noticed. He watched as children practiced for the parade, their small flags held high, their feet slightly out of step, but their faces full of pride. A soft smile touched Walter's lips. The sight brought a gentleness to his eyes, a reminder of why he had always worked quietly, never seeking notice, only wanting to leave the world a little better than he'd found it. The town square looked different now, dressed in its red, white, and blue, the bunting fluttering at every corner. The meeting hall windows gleamed wreaths hanging proudly on their doors. Everywhere there was the hum of preparation voices, lifted in purpose, hammers tapping nails into banners, the occasional burst of laughter as someone shared a memory or a joke. Ashwood had come alive in a way that felt both new and long overdue. Margaret Caldwell found Walter near the old fountain at the square's center. She approached with quiet steps, the weight of her robe gone now, just a neighbor coming to speak with another. Her invitation was simple, but sincere. She asked him to join them at the tribute, to let the town show its gratitude. Walter listened, his gaze dropping for a moment to the bricks beneath his feet. He hesitated. The idea of standing in the spotlight made him uneasy. His worry was not for himself, but that the focus on him might take something away from the other veterans, the other stories worth honoring. Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm, understanding, without needing to hear the words. She assured him that this was about more than any one man. It was about healing, about setting right what had been wrong, about showing the children of Ashwood the true measure of quiet courage. Walter nodded, slowly, moved by her kindness, by the sincerity he saw reflected in every corner of this town he had once served so silently. Across the street, seated at a corner booth of the diner, the reporter worked steadily, the scratch of his pencil on paper almost lost amid the diner's cheerful clatter. He had come to cover a hearing, but he found himself chronicling a transformation. The story unfolding before him was no longer just about a summons or a misunderstanding. It was about a town rediscovering its heart. Walter returned to the diner with Margaret, drawn by the sense of belonging that seemed to hum in the very walls. The clatter of plates, the low murmur of friendly voices, the warmth of pie fresh from the oven, it all felt like a balm. Hank caught his eye and gave him a wink as if to say, "See, we're all in this together now." Conversations turned to memories, shared offers of help, exchanged freely. Folks spoke of the weather, of family, of the simple things that bound them together. When at last Walter agreed to attend the tribute, a quiet cheer rippled through those who heard. It was not loud or boastful, just a shared relief, a small celebration of a man's humility meeting a town's renewed purpose. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting a golden haze over the diner's polished counter and the faces of its patrons, a small hand tugged at Walter's sleeve. A child, eyes wide with curiosity and admiration, looked up at him and asked in a clear, earnest voice, "My dad says you're a hero." Is that true? Sunlight spilled across Ashwood's town square, gilding flags and faces as the parade band began to play. The first bright notes of the march echoed off the brick storefronts, mingling with the steady beat of drums and the soft cheer of the gathered crowd. The morning air was brisk, but the warmth of the day's purpose seemed to chase away the chill. Bunting draped from the lamp-posts rippled gently in the breeze, and the scent of cider from a vendor's cart mixed with the sweet trace of cinnamon from pies cooling on nearby windowsills. Children waved small flags, their mittens clumsy but eager, their laughter ringing clear above the music. The square, once the scene of uneasy glances and whispered doubts, now pulsed with unity. Folks stood shoulder to shoulder, bundled against the November air, drawn together by more than just the holiday. They had come to honor Walter Briggs, though he himself stood modestly off to the side, his old army jacket neat but plain, his hat in his hands. The modest lines of his face were touched with color, not from pride, but from the quiet emotion of being seen at last for who he was. The parade passed in a steady rhythm. Local veterans, the high school band, scouts, and little leagues, all stepping in time, banners held high. Margaret Caldwell took her place at the podium, her voice carrying clear and steady across the square. She spoke not only of Walter's deeds, but of the quiet way he had served, how he had repaired what was broken, offered help where none was asked for, and how he had given so much without ever seeking a word of praise. Her words painted him in the truest colors of a hero, not for grand gestures, but for the small, steadfast acts that had built the fabric of the town. When she stepped aside, Hank and Elaine approached Walter together, their hands steady as they presented him with a plaque engraved with simple, powerful words, "For service beyond the call, Ashwood. Thanks you." The crowd broke into applause, genuine and full, a sound that filled the square and seemed to push back the very chill of the season. Walter accepted the plaque, its weight solid in his hands, the metal cool against his palms. He looked down at it a long moment before finding his voice. His words were few, as was his way. He thanked them, yes, but more than that, he asked them to remember that kindness should not be saved for special days. That understanding and respect should live in their hearts, as surely as these flags lived over their town. His voice, low and even, carried to every corner of the square, carried by the stillness of those who listened. The reporter stood at the edge of the crowd, his notebook closed now, a quiet smile on his face. He had come seeking a story and found instead a lesson, one that needed no embellishment. Around him, the simple power of community spoke louder than any headline. As Walter stepped back, a boy pushed through the front row, his small hand raised in a salute that trembled only slightly with the weight of the moment. Walter blinked in surprise, then returned the salute, his posture straightening, as if the boy's courage had lent him some of its strength. One by one, others followed the young, the old, hands lifted in quiet respect. A sea of faces turned toward him, bound in gratitude. Walter gazed at the square, peaceful at last, as church bells chime and flags ripple overhead. The morning light bathed Ashwood Square in a quiet warmth, where flags swayed gently and neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, their hearts lighter than they had been in years. In the soft hush that followed the day's tribute, one could feel the strength of kindness, a strength that had always been there waiting to be seen. The story of Walter Briggs reminded them all that true heroism often wears no badge, and that when we set aside judgment, we make room for compassion to grow. Like the steady glow of a porch light on a dark night, a simple act of goodness can guide us home. And perhaps as we go about our own days, we might pause to notice the quiet helpers among us and choose to honor them not just in word but in spirit.